Hello fellow humans. I felt compelled to do a follow-up to the episode on maximum wealth and talk more about limits. This is an off-the-cuff video. I have 4 items for today. Compare limits to freedoms, a sudden list of limits, everything in nature and society is limited already, and how degrowth is an experience of limits. This should not be hard, but most ideas appear easy at the beginning. Then the more you put your brain to work, the more complicated it gets. I do like simplicity though, and I think that we should strive for that. It doesn't mean that simple ideas are always the correct ones, but when they are, we should attempt to express them as clearly as possible. When the state imposes taxes on income and wealth for whatever reason, is that a limit on freedom? When the law says you have to wear a seatbelt for your own protection, is that a limit on freedom? When the state conscripts all men because the country has gone to war, is that a limit on your freedom? How about stopping at the red light? How about giving or taking a vaccine? Driving on the right side of the road? Fining people for not putting paper into the recycling bin? Is that a limit on freedom? Let's get more political. What is the limit to freedom of expression for hate speech, incitement to violence? What is the limit to the freedom of movement for national security, pandemics, legal custody, freedom of assembly to prevent riots, blockades or threats to public safety, freedom of privacy limited by government surveillance programs aimed at preventing crime or terrorism, freedom of owning property that can be limited by zoning laws, environmental regulations, or eminent domain. These limitations are often justified on the grounds that they are necessary in a free and democratic society, especially when they are reasonable and proportionate to the goals they aim to achieve. Key word here, necessary. Who decides what is necessary? Isaiah Berlin distinguished between negative and positive liberty, arguing that too much of either could limit freedom. Negative liberty is freedom from interference by other people. They cannot enter your property, they cannot steal from you, and so on. Positive liberty is the power you have to act in society, faced, of course, by the constraints of society itself. Is liberty the same as freedom? Largely speaking, yes. Thomas Hobbes advocated for a strong central authority to avoid the chaos of the state of nature, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That sounds like a pretty gloomy view of nature, doesn't it? John Locke believed in natural rights, and the government should protect those rights, but also recognize we need laws to ensure social order. It's getting a little better already. John Stuart Mill, known to his friends as J.S. Mill on the Hill, wrote about the harm principle, suggesting that individual freedom should only be limited to prevent harm to others. Now we're talking a bit of empathy. My man J.J. Rousseau discussed the social contract, where individuals consent to limitations on their freedom for the benefit of community and protection. Whoa, J.J. for the win! Talking about consent, benefit to community in the 1700s, but history is not always about progress. We have Robert Nozick, who argued for a minimal state and explored the boundaries of individual rights. Mr. Nozick, a hardcore libertarian, actually argued against distribution of wealth because property and wealth are not manna from heaven, but rather come into the world already attached to people having entitlements over them. Nozick was right that property is not manna, but wrong about entitlements, since a lot of property comes into the world through inheritance, blood and tears, and through the anti-democratic rules of capitalism. Capitalism creates by design very specific limits. If we see capitalism as the undemocratic trinity of power, property, capital, and the eye of growth, also known as the profit incentive, at its center, if we see capitalism in this way, we can detect how limits appear under capitalism. Let's define power as the ability to cause change. Property as something that can be possessed by humans, and capital as something used to produce something else in the economy. Forget about markets. private ownership of the means of production, centralized planning, all of that. The limit to your power in capitalism is how much property you possess. You do not own stock in a company, you do not have power in that company. The limit to your property is privilege or luck. Either you are lucky to inherit property or get lucky at earning some property from your labor. Capital is limited by many things, including geography, availability, and the state. Not all property can become capital, but all capital must be property in order to produce something. If you want freedom in capitalism, you need to fully play the Trinity game. Own property. Use the power the property gives you to move capital so the whole Trinity keeps growing. The market is just a playground. The state is just a background. There are inconveniences that slow down the Trinity. Why do you think most corporations want to become monopolies, to fully control the markets? Because markets are fussy. Or in the case of Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, to actually become the market itself, in what Yanis Varoufakis calls techno-feudalism. Why do corporations keep asking for deregulation and tax cuts? To diminish the nuisance of the limits imposed by the state. The Trinity is desperate to break all the limits, because the eye of growth doesn't know about self-control. Remember Tommy Hobbes with his bleak view? Let's prove him wrong. Bill Gates was born in an already rich family. He went on to become the world's richest person because he played the rules of capitalism. Same with everyone on the Forbes list. Okay, maybe not Oprah, but she also played the rules of the system to win. Even Oprah took more wealth from her employees than what she paid them in salary. The system is about luck all the way down, with no merit or personal agency whatsoever. On the other hand, we have a Dalit person who may be born with the same natural IQ as Einstein. If there is such a thing as natural IQ, we will never know. The so-called natural state of the untouchable Dalit is squalor, like Hobbes said. Why does Tommy Hobbes apply to the Dalit and not to Elon Musk? So no, there is no natural state for humans that applies to everyone equally. It's just society with its unfair, unjust hierarchies and roles. In order to prove that limits, such as the maximum wealth, restrict freedoms, you will have to prove that maximum freedom can exist in the absence of limits. But there is no such thing as unlimited anything. The laws of physics have their limits. The speed of light, the range of the fundamental forces, the mass of particles, the granularity of space, the granularity of time. It is impossible to define infinity without reference to time or space. Try it. Ask any mathematician to define infinity without reference to time, space, or abstractions. Humans and society are born with even more limits, on top of the limits imposed by the laws of physics. Our bodies grow then die. Life evolves and becomes extinct. Cultures also evolve, transform, disappear, or morph into something else. Joseph Tainter writes about how complex societies collapse. They become more complex by trying to solve problems. This complexity requires increasing amounts of energy to maintain, and in time, the benefits of greater complexity diminish. And when they no longer outweigh the costs, societies can rapidly lose complexity in a collapse. So, to refuse a limit to wealth, such as $10 million, has no basis on any natural argument. It is entirely a moral and political question that is not about blocking freedom that is already blocked and limited by definition, and it's more about creating a more equitable life for all humans, not just those that were privileged by luck without any merit of their own. This idea that human imagination is unlimited, that human needs and desires are unlimited, comes from some silly misunderstandings, forgetting that humans are not separated from nature, forgetting about the collapse of past civilizations, forgetting about the physical limits of the planet, forgetting about terrible inequalities and injustices in the world. forgetting about the historical privilege of some groups over others. It's about forgetting. Cornelius Castoriadis writes that an autonomous society is one whose attitude toward its own institutions is lucid, reflective, and free, one that is not subservient to those institutions. Self-limitation is autonomy and includes the constraining of political excesses. For example, the protection of minority rights, social behaviors, and collective action in regards to the external world and the environment. Self-limits are needed not because nature is telling us to stop, but because it is the right thing to do in order to survive. Georgios Kallis writes in his book on limits, "It is we who must stop extracting fossil fuels. The sky is not asking us to stop." How is degrowth an experience of being finite? Pasi Heikkinen says that limits are nothing imposed on us by the natural science or policymakers. They are something that we should collectively fathom. In the minimalist definition, degrowth is a voluntary reduction of production and consumption. Okay, but what does that mean to you? It's living simply, yes, consuming very few things and wasting very little. This is not a badge of honor, but it is letting go of stuff that is eating away your soul, your identity, and your freedoms. Yes, your freedoms. The more you are dependent on playing the game of consumption, the more you are a slave to the Trinity. Break away from the Trinity and find your freedoms. This experience of knowing your inside limits and outside limits is the best thing you can do to increase your freedoms. This is something that has been known for centuries. It's not revolutionary. Degrowth is only a new word that talks about centuries-old ideas of thoughtful living within nature. The experience of limits is already happening to the most disadvantaged people on the planet, but not by choice. Poverty is not an experience of limits. Poverty is domination of one group over another. It has nothing to do with degrowth and self-limitation. This is why the burden of change rests on the shoulders of the rich countries, unless the majority world will force this transformation by cutting the supply of resources towards the minority-rich world. What is it going to be? Can we wait on YouTube to promote videos like this one that attack capitalism and advocate for self-limitation? YouTube, just like any agent that plays the Trinity games, only knows and wants growth. Thinking about limits in general and self-limitation specifically is an invitation to slow down so you can breathe more, consume less to feel better, disobey the Trinity to discover yourself, checkmate the Trinity, win for humanity. If you can, please support me through the links below to cover the costs of these videos. Future videos will not be possible without your support. I will never collect money from advertising. Until next time, be well, increase the peace.